Hello all, it's KR King of D&D Homebrew, and today I'm talking about forgotten gods. And this is something that I've used, virtually from the beginning when I started playing D&D, this concept that a god could be forgotten, that it could somehow lose its followers on the material plane, no longer, exert the sort of powers that other gods who do have followers have, through some essential sort of the nature of how they work on the material plane of your world, and as such become forgotten. They don't have adherents. And as longtime viewers of my channel know, from the very beginning, I always stressed keeping it simple. Trying to create a homebrewed world is complicated enough, the civilization, cities, and personages. You're always thinking of ways to start with a kind of framework or basic concept, work your way up as the players explore your world. The forgotten god concept works right into that because of the nature of it, no longer have any influence on the material plane. The players discover something about it, and slowly but surely, the powers and the history, and the interests of this god are revealed. And, in a way, they're revealed to you as the GM. And I first came across this concept in the 70s from the original Star Trek show, which was in continual reruns in those days. And Star Trek was a big influence, the Captain Kirk effect, because he was the, He-Man, Battlemaster, Casanova, hero of us as kids. He was constantly breaking the prime directive with various alien beauties and whatnot. But also, I had a thing that I would ask my D&D players when they seemed to be in a hopeless situation. The odds were impossible. They were captured, trapped. There was no escape. And I would always say, what would Captain Kirk do? Would he lay down on the ground and start crying? Would he beat his hands on the ground? This is no fair. What would he do? He would think of other things, outside the box, trying to figure things out. He would always, look for some angle. And when the players started doing that, suddenly ideas would come to them of how to escape. And we also got all sorts of ideas from Star Trek in terms of various episodes, monsters, situations, civilizations to incorporate into D&D. And this was no exception in terms of forgotten gods. There was an episode called Who Mourns for Adonis, in which this super powerful being transports a bunch of, Kirk and his crew down to their planet. It's this, god dressed in Greek clothing. It calls itself Apollo. The terrain is like Greek temples and says, I am Apollo, you shall worship me. Basically, what the Kirk and crew discover is this guy claims we were in ancient Greece. These powerful beings, the Greeks worship them. They gave them information and technology and civilization for their worship. But for some reason that's murky to me, the people began not to believe in these gods, and they lost their power. They had to return to their home planet or something, because the belief, the worship of the gods was what gave them such great powers. And in fact, Apollo was the last god left. All the others in the pantheon had faded away into some nether realm because they just gave up waiting for humans to return, to come to the stars, and worship them again. But here they were. And so Apollo wanted them to worship them. And Kirk figured out this weakness of Apollo, got him to be jealous or something, and neutralized his power or something, and escaped. But to me, the idea that gods depended on the worship of their followers as an essential part of manifesting power in the material plane was fascinating, right? And so I wanted to create forgotten gods, those that no longer had followers, and think about what that would be like and how they might, still have little areas or niches or information about them such that players could discover that and sort of get away a conduit for them to return to the material plane. Now, what's important here, the mechanics of this followers and power is a little tricky. When we first started playing D, we were always like, why are the gods not just, blasting each other all the time? Why are they limited to these, puny mortals, these humanoids, to show their power to one another? And it relates both to the nature of religion in the real world and a game mechanic. Then it's not interesting if the gods are just coming in and wiping things out. The player characters and they're, are just standing around watching things, right? So there's a mechanic there that the players have to, work to advance the gods' goals and whatnot on this playground, as it were. And they're all sort of competing with each other, almost like, on a chessboard, the masters. Another Star Trek episode, I bet 50 cremuleks on the newcomer kind of thing. So, you didn't want to go too far into that. You wanted to just say, okay, we're manifesting that and they get followers and they do this. When the concept of how many followers, how much power, you don't want to go there either, because The game mechanics say that all the clerics, paladins, whatever the divine power in the RPG that you're playing, they have specific, spells and advancements, and whatever deity it is, it's always pretty balanced. It's just different flavors, whether it's a nature god or a god of death or healing or that sort of thing. So if you get into how many followers affects the power, you don't want to go there, because oftentimes you'll have, let's say you're using the Greyhawk Pantheon, which I use in a current campaign just for simplicity. Pelor is the most commonly worshipped god. Many more followers than the other religions. Well, does that mean those clerics get more powers with more followers? They get twice as many spells, or their heals are twice as powerful? No, they don't. They get the same game mechanic spells. So the idea here is you just got some forgotten gods. If you've got no followers, you don't have any power. If you've just got a few, and here's the other thing. You could always say that, look at sports. The most popular teams, the most well-known teams have the most followers, but a lot of them are casual fans. Whereas the niche teams may have less followers, but they're rabid followers, right? They're fanatics, right? So you could say the same thing about gods. The smaller, if they have a super dedicated, the cults who are willing to sacrifice their own relatives, in worship of their god, that's an incredibly strong devotion belief, and that's more powerful than just the average person, goes to church, once a year and doesn't really adhere to any of the tenets. So the thing about thinking of a forgotten god is, inherently, since it has no followers, it has no power, how is it going to leave some trace of itself? Is it going to have a little, access to the material plane? Is it through some artifact, some book? Remember the Necronomicon, H.P. Lovecraft's book, and it's been done in a million horror movies where you have this evil book that sometimes has a face on it that talks and whatnot. And the minute you open this book, you open some kind of portal to this evil god, and it's going to take you over or have some influence. Or remember the Candyman movies, where if you say Candyman 3 times, which you'll notice I'm not doing, he will be manifest in the world and start doing evil things. So if you say the god's name. In horror movies, of course, these tend to be evil gods, these, destructive. In the world of D&D, they could be any kind of god, right? It could be lawful good, it could be evil, or anywhere in between. But the key thing is this forgotten god has lost its founder. Now, why did this happen? Well, the most common way is just people moved on to other religions, right? There are countless, say, animist gods that were worshipped 50,000, 100,000, whatever, in cultures all over the world that are long forgotten, right? No one knows who they were. They weren't written down. They were gods. They were very important at that time. So maybe the god is forgotten just because in the course of history, other gods came along that were more popular. Again, in a D&D framework, you could say their spells are more effective or something. They did more for people. However you want to justify it. But the point is, all of their followers have drifted away. And that in your world is some sort of essential aspect of this god manifesting some sort of power on the material plane. It's not based on its strength or the spell level, anything like that. You could say the moment a god has just a few fervid followers, they begin to get spells or whatnot. Unless there's another reason that this god is forgotten. And you can always have, there was some kind of war between the gods, this god did something forbidden, it interfered in events in a way that the gods aren't supposed to do, and it was punished. And it was, placed in some limbo, some plane somewhere where it couldn't manifest its powers, and its followers just drifted away. Suddenly none of their spells were working, it was clear something was wrong, and they moved on to other gods. This god, so that could be another one. It's been punished. I think the Greyhawk Thera's Doom, somebody can tell me this was, leashed, enchained in some kind of limitless black hole or limbo or something, and always trying to get himself back to the material plane. Again, this is something that, this is the gods working against each other. And they made some transgression. They were banished. But there's something in your world, as I said, a book, an artifact, something the players discover. Could be a tapestry that's got magic in it of the final battle, that cataclysmic fight between this god. And there's something there that if they research it, there can be a communication here. Now, if you have some evil forgotten god, it may not be so wise for the players to do this, but there could be a cult that's discovered this. And the players come across and they realize they're trying to bring back this forgotten god. This just a few members, or 5 or 10 or something like this. They don't have enough followers to truly bring it back. Certain things have to occur, certain events, certain artifacts have to be collected, such that the players, they wouldn't call forward this evil god, but these cultists are going to do that. You could also have a god that retreats for some reason. It decides that its presence on the material plane is no longer needed, or it wants to move on to other things. It doesn't like having these followers. Maybe it was disgusted by its followers. They became, vain or greedy and using the powers of this god in a wrong way. And it kept trying to cut them off or change them, and it couldn't. And it just retreated. So let's say it's a neutral god, and it's of nature and growth and whatever. And the people that worshipped it weren't doing enough to help nature. Instead, they were using nature and technology or something like this. So what it might have, it's a forgotten god. Once the power is taken away for whatever reason, once its adherents realize we're not getting anything and they forget about this god, it maintained a secret glade somewhere of absolute beauty, of perfect nature and harmony. And the other gods don't bother it. It's just there. They know about this. Again, their relationships are very mysterious. But the players come across it and they begin to realize something's going on here, and somehow they figure out a way to communicate with this god, or there's information that they've gotten somewhere else. Because again, if it is, in some limbo area or floating around, whatever, it may not be so easily accessed by the players, so they get this information. So suddenly they discover this and they want to communicate. And what do they want to become? Followers of this god? Do they want to advance its interest? Maybe not. Maybe it's like Tom Bombadil in The Lord of the Rings. This mysterious figure who lives in the old forest, isn't interested in the events of the world, isn't interested in the ring. If they gave it to him, he might forget about it. He's one of these characters. Doesn't really work in the narrative. He wasn't in any of the movies, right? But in your world, you could have a Tom Bombadil type god that lends some flavor and mystery. And there's, you can go there if you need help in some way to be healed, or a time to, find shelter or refuge or something. But this god is not going to get involved in the world. You're only allowed to stay there a very short period of time, something like that. And it's a forgotten god to this day. It doesn't want any more worshipers. It doesn't trust the humanoids of the material plane. But the players discover this and realize this. If they want to become followers, this is the sort of thing, because you don't necessarily want to create a whole nother spell list, but you could take a nature god. If the players do help it or whatever, they may give them access to communicate with plants or something. Just an ability. You don't necessarily have to say, well, I want to become a priest to this god. You can have that god. It's not that interested. The players have discovered it, but it's not going to just take on new followers. Or you can. Right? What that means is you got to develop this whole spell list and make sure it's balanced and not out of hand. For me and my friends, whenever we created new pantheons and knew we went away from the spell list, we tend to make them too powerful. That was just us. We were kids or whatnot. So you just want to be careful about that. The other element here is when a god is forgotten, where is it? This is something. When, Apollo in the Star Trek episode, the other gods had faded away. They were so tired of waiting for humans to worship them again. They went to some other place. Is it like the shores, the area where the elves went at the end of Lord of the Rings? They were leaving this Middle Earth and going to this place to never return, and Frodo goes there with them at the end. Is it like a limbo? Is it like an astral plane? Are they just floating? Are they just sort of, could it be a paradise? Could it be something where they don't have to worry about the cares of the gods and all the battles and struggles and jealousies? Because again, usually the pantheon of gods, they have personalities like humanoids, sort of the Greek and Roman or, Hindu ideas. Is it a place where they don't realize that they don't have followers? Are they just fading away such that when the players come in contact, they come to the secluded glade, they say, what is going on here? They find this stone tablet, they, comprehend languages or do something magical, and they recite this inscription or something, and suddenly this god is poked for a second, like, wait a minute, someone said one of my prayers, one of my devotions has been said after eons. What has happened? And it realizes in communicating with the players, that it was forgotten. It forgot itself, this kind of thing. And what would its reaction be? And again, what is its alignment? Is it, Dordok, the Destroyer, something like that, where you're like, ooh, this wasn't so smart to read the inscription. Or was it a lawful good, a healing god, or a nature god? Whatever that is, the players have poked it such that it remembers itself. Or has it, in one of these wars between the gods, not merely defeated and denied its followers, but entrapped? Is it being held against its will? And of course, if it's lawful or neutral, it might be a good idea to try to release this god. If it's evil, not. The only thing to remember here is the players are interfering in the will of the gods. They had this battle or this thing that this god committed this transgression, and they have placed it, in this limbo, and the players are trying to free it. So you got to be a little bit careful there. But it could be a god that's so ancient and old and from such a different time, some primal god, such that it's not going to be noticed if the players do this. And you want to make this clear that, when you're describing this god, when this god is speaking to them, it's this proto-common or, something very ancient. It's from a time, perhaps it's an elemental god in a time when it was all just elements and swirling and the planets hadn't formed or anything like that. How useful that would be. But again, it might be because you've done something for this god and it gives you an ability to call an air elemental, once a day or once a week or however you want to do that. And again, make it simple. Make the power that the god potentially gives to the players something just sort of basic. If they do something that's useful to the god. Because the other thing, you have role playing here, this isn't sort of a mechanical thing necessarily. It's something where the players, what do they, what would Captain Kirk do, right? Because you can also say they go into this, if you really want to get tricky here, this nether, this little glade, and there's this pool there that's magical, and a player decides to dive in. And suddenly they're transported into this pocket dimension where this nature god had just kept itself when it was so disgusted by its followers. And they're there. And this god looks at them and says, what are you doing here? And again, it might not like humanoids. It's memory of what the humanoids did. So now they've got to figure out a way to get out of there. And do the other players, oftentimes when players do this kind of thing, in my experience, someone jumps in the pool. The other players go, well, okay, here we go. We got to go in, right? So now they're in the Forgotten Gods realm. What happens there? And this is kind of role play or whatever. And you can just decide, now you've created this Forgotten God, this glade. You had this inscription. You wanted the players just to communicate, find out, see, maybe it needs help. It needs something to finally leave this place. It wants this glade to be protected. It doesn't necessarily want to, expand and have tons of followers, but whatever its purpose is, the players help it out. But now they've dove in and they're in this realm. What happens? How do the players bargain? And you've only just said to yourself, it's kind of a nature god. It's beautiful. It's sort of druidic. It's sort of elemental. I'm not sure. I don't want to sit here and stop everything when they jumped in the pool and come up with all its powers, right? So just role play in terms of, is it angry that they're there because of their betrayal? Or is it glad they're there because it's trapped? Or has it been, it was forgotten and it's just in this limbo and it's like Apollo, it's still hanging on, and then suddenly these humanoids come through, oh my gosh, you will worship me. Is that a good thing? Because we saw in Star Trek it wasn't. They wanted them to stay on this planet and worship them forever. Kirk had better things to do, right? The players may as well. So now they're going to have to do a little role play and figure out what this god wants. And you're just thinking, what did Apollo want? He wanted followers. He wasn't going to let them leave. The nature god that's really disgusted may just want them to leave, and maybe that's it. And the evil god in prison wants to be free, right? And that's it. It's simple. And then you can think about, when you get into, again, if it's on the material plane, its powers are very limited. And I gave you this example where they jump into the pool. You may not want to make that a possibility because now you're in its realm, and its powers as a god are just like Apollo's, where he was just moving them around and zapping their brains. And he had this woman totally in love with him, all these charms and stuff. And Kirk had to use all his skills, jealousy, emotion, to trick Apollo. It's a TV show, right? Maybe that's going to occur in your world. But so you want to keep the powers limited. You want to keep the goals very simple. It's just been forgotten. It's been in prison. And then let the players, if they're interested, if they take the bait, if they want to, if they really want to become worshipers of this god, but if they want to help it or find out more, you can give them a couple of divine powers related to this god, and they might want to protect this glade and make sure other people don't find out about it and this sort of thing. And it adds flavor. And the thing about this is there have been gods, just like in the real world, there have been countless gods that were once worshipped by tens of thousands and now completely forgotten, save the players who have discovered it. And that's a cool thing. So hopefully that was helpful. I'd love to hear about your forgotten gods. I've used it many times. I have one right now that's kind of what I was talking about with Thera's Doom, this evil god that the players are realizing it's trying to manifest itself on my world, and we have cults trying to bring it back, and the players are working to stop this. So that's sort of forgotten. It's unknown, the sort of evil speech that these cultists use. It hurts to hear and all this kind of stuff, and it's never been heard for, tens of thousands of years. I like that sort of thing. I like to create this kind of a thing that the players either it's a good thing that they're trying to happen, or that's a bad thing they're trying to stop. And the idea that this forgotten god, and it's the only, the players are among the very few that know about it, just makes them feel special, which is what they want to do in your world. So, and as always, if you like the content on my channel, please subscribe. Always love some more. As I said, leave some comments on forgotten gods you've created. Most importantly, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you choose, and tell somebody else about it.